This week on Inside of Vexia, we're going to talk about why programming is so much more than just picking the best exercises to make you feel like you got a good workout. There is intent that should be behind what you're doing in the gym, and we're going to give you all of the keys so you know exactly how to program the best workouts for yourself. All right, we're going to dive into Programming 101, and I think it's important that we start with the standard behind why we're making all these decisions and how we got to this big picture. So what's most important here is that we're actually trying to tailor what's best for your nervous system. If you are in a position where you're doing everything focused on how it's going to affect your muscles and your joints, that's certainly a part of the process, but it's not just about what's structurally happening to our muscles and our physical self, but our internal nervous system. So it's a big piece of the puzzle, and we'll talk through that. We'll also talk about hard days versus easy days and how things need to be simple so they're scalable. And last but not least, we're going to try to find a way to help you get set up for consistency and quality so that you can stack this up and compound to start seeing the gains you are looking for. All right, so we're going to break this down into 3 sections. 1, how to have an awesome session, so by the session itself. 2, how to make sure that you're structuring your whole week. And then 3, how you create some progression so you can start to stack things week over week, month over month, year over year. Starting with the session. The first thing that we want to focus on is a warm-up. Some people are not big on warm-ups, some people think they're lame, but the goal that we take into this is that we do 4 parts and we use the RAMP acronym. So that is R-A-M-P. We're going to raise your heart rate so we can get your blood flowing, get your body moving, start to get your core temperature elevated. We're going to activate to stabilize. If you watched our last video, you'll understand the value of stability first. We're going to mobilize different ranges of motion. So start to open your body up and prepare for the movement patterns you'll have that day. And then we're going to potentiate your nervous system, or we're going to start to get your nervous system ramped up so you can really feel like you have that internal effort or oomph to really get the most out of your session. Now the warm-up should really take anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes. If you find yourself warming up for 20 to 30 minutes and you're not someone training more than 5 hours a week or doing something really intense or doing long bouts of exercise, you're probably doing too much. And on the other end of it, if all you're doing is a couple of quick things or nothing and jumping straight into your workout, that's probably not serving you great as well. I typically recommend somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes. Obviously, there's going to be different case scenarios or use cases where you could argue more or less. But at the end of the day, if you can check these things off, then you're good to go, regardless of how long that takes you. From there, the main block should be somewhere around 40-ish minutes. Obviously, there are a ton of different ways you can take this, and some people will need more, some people will need less. We'll go over different special cases, one of them being time restricted. So keep in mind that you can give or take 5 to 10 minutes on each of these. Say you had 30 minutes to work out, that might look like a 5-minute warm-up, a 20-minute main block, and then a 5-minute cool down. So you can always play around with that, but generally the optimal amount of time to work out is somewhere around 50 to 60 minutes with that warm-up and then getting into the main block. First thing you want to look at in the main block is going to be central nervous system demand. So these are things that are going to tax your body. So anytime you're doing something that requires a lot of effort, right? Something that is going to be really functional or fast or really high output. Maybe that's something power focused like jumping, sprinting. Maybe it's something that's heavier like a deadlift or a squat. It's something that's going to be the most demanding on your body. You typically want to do that first while your nervous system and your body is ramped up and at its peak of energy and availability. Another thing too is your energy systems are going to be more primed and you're going to be able to use some of that higher output stuff early. So that's why you want to try to take and get into the toughest stuff and the more difficult things right out of the gate. That would be what most people would call like your primary block, which would be more like functional style movements or compound movements. We'll get into a lot of these here in just a bit, but those are things that move through multiple joints, right? So a squat, I'm going to be using my hips, my ankles, my knees. I'm stabilizing through my upper body. Or maybe a bench press where I'm moving through my chest, my shoulders, my arms, my elbows, and stabilizing through my core, my lower body. Those are more of your compound style exercises. Your structural or isolated stuff or your accessories or maybe secondary blocks of things, typically you would add those in after. So I'm going to do the multi-joint movements and get all the big things knocked out early while I've got more energy and my nervous system is more primed for that. And as I work further into it, maybe I focus more on isolated things or more structural things, things that are maybe targeted more towards smaller muscle groups or things that are secondary to fatigue, maybe your triceps after a bench press or your shoulders after a pull-up or something along those lines, right? Once you work through the main block, obviously looking into a cool down, but from there, the cool down is really less about like stretching. There's lots of studies that go back and forth about post-workout stretching. Certainly benefits of having more flexibility, but your active range of motion is going to be the most important piece of this. If you are going to do static stretching, typically I recommend doing that more at the end and keeping all of your stretching or dynamic stuff more dynamic on the front end of a workout where you're mobilizing. And then the biggest thing about the cool down is not so much just the structural side of it, which is what foam rolling and stretching can do, but the nervous system piece. Taking your time to slow back down and breathe and bring your nervous system back to more of a resting state so you can reintegrate your body into your day without taking and carrying that stress over. And that brings one big point back to the whole nervous system thing. Your goal is to work your body into a sympathetic or stressed state. Really start to get your body ramped up and get your stress elevated during a workout and your nervous system elevated. But after workout, the goal is to teach your body how to down-regulate and get back to more of a parasympathetic or rest and digest state. So that's most of the basics on how to structure a session. As we work through the rest of this, we'll start putting in the puzzle pieces so you know what things to put in that session, starting next with movement patterns. All right, let's dive into the big 7 movement patterns. These are ones that you'll hear a lot of people talking about, and they're really your functional movement patterns, right? So when you hear people talk about functional movement, this is typically what they're discussing or what they're referring to, and that is a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, a lunge, a carry, and a rotational movement. The thing about this is there are a ton of variations to each one of these. I can do a straight up bodyweight squat. I can do a goblet squat, a back squat, a pistol squat, an overhead squat. There's about 100 different variations of all these different exercises, but the goal is to pick which ones make sense, right? And this is where the value of having a coach is. You can figure out what makes sense for you. They can help you give that outside perspective, but if you're not really sure where to start, I would just start with the body weight, go to a goblet, go to a back squat. If you go back to our very first video, we talked about assessment, we talked through progressions and which ones to pick and where to decide what one makes the most sense. But the goal is that you're doing all of these over the course of a week. So let's look over it like an example day of the week. Maybe you have 3 days of lifting. I might go through and pair a squat, a hinge, and a lunge for a traditional lower body day. I'm getting all my big movement patterns for that. That is my main block, right? My main block could be my squat. And then I could have my accessory be more of a hinge and a lunge. And then I can put some carries in there just to give my body a little bit more of a core focus or something more functional and integrated. Or if I wanted to, I could do the opposite for more of an upper body, or I can mix and go full body and go squat, pull, rotate on one day. There's a lot of different ways you can bring this to life. The most important thing is that you're hitting each one of these patterns at least bare minimum 1 time per week. Now, if I have a weak link, let's say that my deadlift, like great example, I'm not the greatest deadlifter. I didn't grow up training pulling deadlifts off the floor, but we squatted like crazy because I played a ton of football and we bench pressed. So my focus would be like, man, if I want to get better at deadlifting, I should probably hinge twice per week, but still make sure I still am getting in some form of like all the other movement patterns. The goal is to make sure that you're not only just hitting those and doing different variations, because my goal would be like, all right, I want to move better. I need to be able to move through a different variety of squats. So I'm going to switch up the style of squat more often. Or maybe my goal is to build my 1 rep max on my back squat. Every time I squat, it should probably be more focusing on the skill of doing that variation. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to peel off and go in different directions based on specific goals. But another thing to keep in mind is that pushing is not just one plane of motion. So specifically in like the pushing, the pulling, the lunging, there are different variations of those that get you into different planes of motion, specifically the lunge, right? So a reverse lunge is going to be more sagittal plane where I'm moving front to back, where a lateral lunge is going to be more frontal plane where I'm moving side to side. So some of these will get you into different planes of motion, and that's also something to keep in mind, right? So we'll add that in here as a special consideration. It's just, am I moving in different planes of motion? That's where the rotational piece comes in. You should be moving sagittally, front to back, which is a lot of what we do, frontally, side to side, but also rotationally, which would be transverse, right? So that's where making sure you get some rotational movement, making sure that you get some lateral movement in. Those pieces are a big part of it as well. So outside of the big 7 that we have here, we also like to take into some extra considerations for things that we feel like are super important here at Avexia. And that is 1, making sure that you are training your core specifically and directly. If you're not doing some form of isolated core training, this once again, different like angles or planes of motion, right? I have my anterior core, my posterior core, my lateral core, more of like that deep stabilization. There's lots of layers to this as well. So you could think about the different layers of how I have functional use of my core. That plays into the rotation, right? If I'm gonna rotate, that is working through my midsection. So you'll see a little bit of carryover in some of these things. Glute and hamstring iso, if you watched our last episode, we talk about how a lot of people sit in hip flex positions all the time. So getting a little bit more focus on the butt and the hamstrings and the lower abdomen and just things that are gonna drive better posture through your lower, or through your torso are gonna be definitely helpful, especially if you're someone who sits a lot. And because most people who work with coaches are people that typically have relatively inactive jobs, or even people that don't have inactive jobs, just getting some of that stuff to work more actively through your posterior chain is gonna be super important. So we'd like to integrate that into most people's different movements and getting patterns and accessories that will really drive that piece. So you've got some glute and hamstring activation. And then last but not least, cyclical movements. These are things like running, biking, rowing, swimming, hiking, skiing, all the things that are repetitive in nature that teach your body how to work through cycles and build more muscular endurance. So that's gonna be a lot of conditioning focused things, still a type of pattern of movement. And some of these maybe not so much like glute and hamstring iso. That's not a movement pattern per se, but it is something that we add in there is like a focus. So you can emphasize that, right? That might mean doing hinging patterns that don't look like a traditional hinge at the waist. It might be more of a hip thrust or a glute bridge or a GHD or reverse hyper, things that are gonna work on your posterior chain more isolated to build strength through your back. But collectively, when you start to bring these two together, the session should involve sections of movement, right? So when we come back over and we think about what I'm doing, my main blocks would be some of these bigger movement patterns, where my accessories, the structural stuff, might be more of like my stereotypical aesthetically driven or smaller muscle group focused areas, right? Maybe I'm working on triceps, biceps, calves, doing something that's more isolated to my quads, my glutes, my hamstrings, my chest, my back, whatever it might be. That's where you get into more of like the bodybuilding style. But one thing you'll notice here is none of this says you should be doing CrossFit, you should be doing bodybuilding, you should be doing powerlifting. You'll certainly see movements and things that play into that, but everything here is focused on principles, not methods. And if you look at all the different methods in any traditional training background, there are a lot of crossover, and the crossover is where these principles come to light, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. So up next, we will dive into the progressions. We will dive into the standard again, but also talk through some special use case scenarios. So now we've hit how to break down a workout. We've hit all the things that you should do over the course of a week, but the most important part about this is progression. Some people will get into the gym and they will do the same stuff over and over and over again and wonder why they're not changing. And a lot of that is because they are not training in blocks that are progressive and intentionally designed to build on top of each other. Now here's where you'll get a lot of coaches that are gonna fight you about what the best periodization or progression looks like. We're not gonna sit here and say that you should do a linear or reverse linear or daily undulating or conjugate. Like there's 100 different ways you can bring that to life, and all of them work as long as they are progressive, as long as they focus on progressing workload in a way that's not gonna overstress your body, break you down, or lead to injury. So the most important pieces of this are that one, it is stacking week over week on top of each other. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just more. Sometimes that can mean slower tempo. Sometimes that can mean adding more weight or reps. Sometimes that can mean actually adding less things to do more in other areas. There's just so many variables, everything from weight to rest times to tempo to different styles of loading, stable, unstable. You could just create a whole laundry list, but as long as it is progressively and intentionally building from week over week, you are going to set yourself up to see your body adapt to those changes. Now, another thing to keep in mind is you can't always just keep progressing forward. At some point in time, your body is going to break down if you are not doing it intentionally or slowly enough. So that's where you'll hear people talk about different things like deload weeks, or up and down types of periodization where you have hard days or easy days. That's typically, in our opinion, the best way to keep people progressing forward is to separate so that you have some days that are really difficult, some days that are not, some that are max effort, some that are dynamic effort, right? It gives you a chance to make sure that you're managing your workload and your body's stress and recovery so that you can still be progressing forward but never get to the point to where you're just building until you break. Just imagine you've got to have that opportunity, whether it looks like this and it's slowly elevating, or it looks like here and you drop and come back up. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but you got to make sure that it's progressive. The reason we like to do 4 to 12 week blocks too is because sometimes it gets boring to do the same thing over and over again, and your body does adapt to what you do. So whether you do 4, you do 6, you do 8, you do 10, you do 12, that's just a good general recommendation for when to stick with something and then cycle off of it and maybe transition to something different. When you start to think about the foundation of where you should begin with any type of progression, you want to consider what types of adaptations are going to happen the fastest. Typically speaking, strength and building maximal strength is the thing that takes the longest for your body to be able to develop. Conditioning can be developed in shorter windows, and even power can be developed in shorter windows because power is going to be ultimately mass times acceleration for how much force you can produce. So you can focus on building speed, you can focus on building endurance, maybe in a little bit shorter windows. I would say that strength takes the longest, speed probably somewhere in that range as well, depending on what type of speed and what duration of speed. But also endurance is going to be something that generally can improve relatively quickly. So you want to lay a foundation of strength. You want to make sure that no matter if you are somebody who is focusing on building your endurance, you're building your sports strength, your lifestyle strength, your functional strength, or if you're even just training for longevity, having a foundation of strength is the absolute key to building your body and becoming real resilient and performing better. Even if your goal is weight loss, having strength for your metabolism, like the foundation should be strength. And then next would be, what kind of endurance do I need to live the life that I want or perform at the capacity that I want for whatever my desires or hobbies or daily demands look like. From there, conditioning is something that should be looked at in 2 parts, or endurance conditioning, you can put them all in the same bucket. The conditioning should be strategic based on what you need for your demands, but also what's going to drive the best health outcomes. One thing that people don't think about when they hear cardio is that your cardiovascular system is your heart and your veins and your arteries and all the things that keep you alive. And people who do cardio live longer. They have lower all-cause mortality. They're going to be more functional. They're going to be able to enjoy life better. There's a lot of things that are going to come from cardio other than just burning fat. So at the end of the day, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing strategic conditioning regardless of what your goals are. So what is strategic conditioning? I'll walk you through it. Number 1, you need to build a base. You need to be able to have most of your low-intensity cardio as the primary focus of what you're doing. And this is where most people get conditioning or cardio wrong. They go out and they just work really hard so that they're breathing hard, they're sweating hard, they're fatigued. Base cardio should be something that feels easy enough that you can have a natural conversation with somebody. It should be in the lower percentage of your heart rate zone. So if you use a heart rate monitor, it should be somewhere around like 60% or less of your VO2 max or your max heart rate. That would be putting you in a position where I'm building the idle of my engine, right? I'm getting my body efficient at utilizing fat. I'm able to use more oxygen and uptake more oxygen to drive more energy to my body. It will help with recovery, and overall it's just going to give you a solid foundation on the conditioning side. And then probably like 30% of the time, 20% of the time, you want to be doing some form of harder exercise in like a threshold for conditioning. So that might mean I'm getting to the point to where I'm starting to breathe hard and I'm not able to really keep up with a conversation because I'm working hard enough that I'm still challenging my ability to work, but also not going so hard that I can't have any type of conversation. And then last but not least, very little of your time in conditioning should be spent with absolute max effort. And even when you are doing that, it shouldn't be over a long duration. You're talking a couple minutes at max, depending on where you're at. Obviously, it's going to vary in regards to volume, but max effort conditioning is something that is only going to be necessary about 5 to 10% of the time for the general population. Now, if you're someone, once again, with special case, we can get into that. But really just putting generalities on where you spend your time here. Think 70%, think 20 to 25%, and think 5 to 10%. This could be more, you could be less. Obviously, in certain scenarios, you can make arguments for that, but for general population, you need to be doing mostly lower intensity cardio just to help drive at least a baseline, and then you can start to work up. And that goes back to the blocks, right? Right now, I'm training for a high rocks, and I'm doing a little bit more threshold conditioning, but it's in the last block before we actually get into the race. So that'd be like a special case scenario where if I'm not training for a specific event, I'm probably gonna do a little bit less of the higher intensity stuff and just generally build my base. And that's where blocks can come in, right? I can spend 8 weeks doing more of one thing and then have a peak block, and that can build up over time. That's once again where special case gets, so we'll dive into some of those different scenarios and how you can adapt based on your specific situation. So you might be thinking, how in the hell am I going to fit all of this into my schedule? For most people we work with at Avexia, they are busy, they've got a life, they've got a job, they've got kids, they've got plenty of things demanding their time. So one of the biggest challenges is how do I fit all of these things optimally into my schedule? And the truth is that you're not going to be able to be great at all things at once. If you want to be great at your job, you may not be able to work out 6 days a week. If you want to be great and available for your family, you may not be able to work and work out. Like, you can't have all of it at once. But what you can do is you can be way more efficient through the process. So in that case, I'm going to make sure that maybe I only have 3 days a week. And my goal right now is just to really build my foundation of strength. But I do want a little bit of conditioning into that. Well, one easy cardio day could be going out on a bike ride with your family. One hard cardio day could be mixed in with an upper body lift where maybe that's not as demanding on your nervous system. Maybe you're doing 2 full body lifts. Like, there's ways to work around this. You just have to get strategic, and you've got to prioritize what's most important, aka what are your weakest links and how do you prioritize those things so that in my specific scenario, here's an example, maybe I need to build my lower body strength. I'm going to say, okay, cool, I'm gonna have 2 days a week that I'm gonna lift and I'm gonna do lower body work, and then 1 day a week where I'm gonna do upper body work and a little bit of hard cardio, or mix those things together. It doesn't have to be split in a perfect example of saying, all right, you have to work out 5 days a week to see progress. You can mix and match different things. I would just say the thing you wanna get better at, do it more frequently and make sure that you're getting enough intensity at that one thing so that you can show, one, enough of revisiting things to build the skill, and 2, enough intensity for your body to adapt to where the gap is. So that would be kind of an example about how to work through, like, I don't have enough time. Other cases or other scenarios might be the opposite of that, where I'm an athlete and I'm training for something more specific. I kind of leaned into this when I talked about the high rocks example, but an example of what a week looks like for me right now is Mondays I do an upper body lift, Tuesdays I'll do a run, and that's usually like one of my harder runs. Wednesdays I'll do a lower body lift, Thursdays I'll do my easy conditioning, Fridays will be any type of accessories, maybe my mobility, maybe doing another light upper body lift, more like a pump and something vanity focused, and just filling the gaps with little things. And then Saturdays I do race specific types of training in our high rocks class here at Avexia. That's 5-6 days a week, depending on it, but that's because I'm training for something specific. If you're somebody who is a field sport athlete or a team sport athlete, there's different focuses that are going to happen throughout the course of the year. You're going to have preseason, in-season, postseason, out of season, and how you work through those different blocks is going to look very different. If I'm going into preseason, I'm ramping my body up for the demands of the sport so I can physically and structurally, and my nervous system can be prepared to be able to handle what I'm about to go through in my season. My in-season stuff is keeping my structural demands supported by just making sure that I'm in a position where I'm keeping my body resilient to handle the beating of the sport I'm doing. And really, conditioning is probably not going to be that necessary in in-season stuff because you're conditioned to doing the sport. In postseason, a lot of it may be rebuilding strength and rebuilding my body from the beating of the season. And then your off-season is really where you're making your biggest gains in regards to general physical preparedness. One of the things you actually see in youth sports, it's one of the biggest problems in youth sports nowadays, is people are getting their kids so active in all the things throughout the course of the year that they aren't doing anything to generally build their physical skills and capabilities. So if you have somebody playing baseball all year round or basketball all year round, and they never take a season to be able to focus on like building the shortcomings in their physical preparedness, they're not going to be able to stay resilient, and eventually they're going to get hurt from overuse. So that's why it's important for athletes, especially if you're really wanting to be competitive, you have to have a preseason, in-season, postseason, off-season, and they don't have to all be equal at time and length, but if you never cycle in and out of those things, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to be able to keep up with staying injury-free and being able to maximize your performance. Back to other examples, speaking of injuries, how do I adapt these things to specific injuries? That's where different blocks in your workout, specifically targeting activation or stabilization or mobility drills to areas that you have maybe weaker joints or muscular imbalances are going to be important. So if you have injuries, working that stuff into here, modifying your main blocks, your primary, your secondary, your accessories, and using those accessories to help build strength in those areas that are weaker or maybe lagging behind would be one of the best examples. As always, great opportunity to hire a coach or find somebody like a physical therapist or somebody who can help you really build that into your routine. So just because you are injured doesn't mean that you can't train. That's another thing I see a lot of people say is like, oh no, I hurt my knee, so now I can't do any of this. And that's just not true, because your knee's not involved in pushing, pulling, and can be taken out of the rotational component, even some as well. You can do a lot of stuff to work around that, but even support that injury by doing more rehabilitative focused exercises, which if you have someone who understands these principles can certainly work those types of things in. Hormonal related, so I think a lot of women in their perimenopausal ranges, that is going to require things that increase recovery time or allow for better recovery. When you're going through that stage of life, I cannot speak from it personally, but we work with tons of women in that 35 to 65 range. And the biggest thing that we recognize and what the science will tell you is that it is just generally harder for people to recover. Same with general like age-related adaptations. That means that frequency is still going to be important, but intensity and modifying hard days versus easy days and the nervous system side of things are going to be huge, because that's going to play a role with how your body responds hormonally, even when it is not maybe optimized on the hormonal side. And on the age-related piece, maybe that's not so much hormonally or nervous system-wise. There's some nervous system for sure, but structurally, your body has just had more wear and tear. So you have to be strategic about making sure that these things are going to be compounding to improve, not compounding to break down areas of the body that might already be a little bit more fragile from just more use over longer periods of time. Last but not least, pregnancy-related. Obviously, that's going to be different at different phases of pregnancy. Definitely not an expert in that, but we do have prenatal postpartum specialists on staff, and we've worked with tons of different women through their pregnancies, prenatal, postpartum, during the pregnancy, and a lot of that really comes down to what phase are they in. So we try to break that down into 1, the first trimester, 2, the second trimester, the third trimester, and then that initial postpartum period, because each one of those phases are going to have special things that you want to adjust and pivot on. That way you're not putting your client or yourself in a situation where you're not able to make sure they're safe and progressing and doing what's best for their individual use case. All right, we're going to come back to where we started from, and that is the standard for all of these things. It is important to, 1, make sure that you're paying attention to your nervous system as you put all of this together, but also your structural body. Some things are going to be more taxing on your physical body, your joints, your muscles. Other things are going to be more taxing on your nervous system, so your overall energy levels and your body's ability to handle stress. Both are super duper important, so it's important that you pay attention to, is this going to really overstimulate me or stimulate me to the right amount? And is my body going to be able to structurally handle something? Because there are certainly some things that you'll be able to handle better than others, but when you combine both together, it gives you that optimal ability to keep progressing without ever putting your body in a position to break down. And that's the name of the game. Number 2, a part of that is being able to create hard days versus easy days. That also goes back to workload and stress management. You can have the best workout program in the world, but if you cannot recover from it and you cannot stay consistent with it, it just will not work for you. Which makes the next piece very simple. If you can't make it repeatable, if it is not something that is done with quality and consistency, it is not going to be scalable or progressible. So when you look at all these different things, I know we just spent the last X amount of minutes walking through all the details, There are certainly lots of different ways for you to really get fine-tuned and maybe even over-obsess about this. But if I can give you really general advice, get 3 to 5 days worth of training in. Make sure you hit all your movement patterns. Make sure it's progressive. Take into consideration special use cases. Use the RAMP acronym to get your body prepared before workouts, down-regulate your nervous system after, and just plug and play. As I've always said, this is so much more complex than just going to the gym and doing the machines. There's a lot that goes into optimizing your performance, and especially if you are someone who is struggling to put it all together on your own, you don't have enough time, you're not efficient, you're not seeing progress, this is your cue to go out and find a coach who can help you with all these pieces. For us, you can find us at avexiakc.com, and if you're in the Kansas City area, schedule a free intro today. We'd love to walk through how we can bring this to life for you.